All right. When I was 15 years old, I was homeless. And I never imagined I would ever be up here on this stage talking to you right now because I didn't think that far into my future. My priorities were getting enough money for bagels. And if I was extra lucky, whoops, can I go back? Cream cheese. My goal is to make you very hungry this morning. My clothes I found at donation centers, books, necklaces I made if I had to, spare changing and begging strangers on the street for money, and 25 cents made a huge difference in my life. If I had $1.06, it meant I could have a hamburger at Burger King. That was a big deal. I slept under bridges, in abandoned lots. I squatted unused sheds and attempted hitchhiking from Phoenix, Arizona to New York because why not? I heard it was amazing there, the land of opportunity. The streets were paved with gold. I didn't make it, but I made it as far as Jemez Springs, New Mexico, where I lived in a commune digging ditches to earn my stay in the middle of winter. It looked a lot like this. You know, I don't have enough time to talk today about how I became homeless because I think that there's just too much to go into there of the reasons why, but I think it's more important to talk about how I got out. And pretty much, you know, I've often wondered, and so have others, like how against pretty much all odds did I make it up here on the stage? If you don't know me, I'm Cyan Banister. I'm a venture capitalist at Founders Fund. It's one of the top venture firms in the world. I've invested in companies in my career such as Uber, SpaceX, Postmates, Thumbtack, Carta, Niantic, right here, and more. It's difficult to give a short answer as to how I made it here, but if I were forced to say, it would be these 5 things. I've tried to distill it down into these exact points. So let's start with incrementalism. A lot of people tend to think that incrementalism is a bad thing. But how do you go from nothing to something at all? It doesn't happen overnight. Suggesting it does, I think, is irresponsible, and it's out of touch with the realities that a lot of people face. I look at every day as a new day, every moment as a new moment, every conversation's an opportunity to learn more. Little by little, I improved, but I still didn't look far into the future. I looked to the next day, to the evening. I set constant goals for myself, tiny achievements. When I was homeless, it was the bagel. It was getting a shower. It was my personal safety. It was getting better at all of those things. When I had a home and worked, it was about becoming better at every aspect of that job and striving to make more money constantly. The more money I was making was a reflection of the skills I picked up and the knowledge that I obtained. I turned everything into my life. Can we go back a slide? Sorry. I turned everything into my life in a game of leveling up. It's easy to judge that making life a game sounds gross, but it was a difference at one point for me between life and death. When I was 16, I became a ward of the state of Arizona. I was picked up by my favorite police officer, Officer Pratt. We'd become good friends. We were accustomed to these sorts of encounters by then. Usually I ended up in a group home, a detention center, or my mother would take me back for a short period of time, but this day was different. Officer Pratt took me to Dairy Queen. He got me some ice cream, then he took me to the courthouse where he got me a plate of spaghetti. He let me sit where the judge sits while I ate, and then after some time passed, I finished, a woman came in and told me she was my public defender. I had no idea what that meant. I wasn't sure why I needed to be defended from the public. It was kind of strange. But she explained that the judge was coming in, and so was my mother. My mother would stand on one side of the room when the judge spoke to me. I was to address him as Your Honor. My only response to all of this was, okay. It all happened so fast. The judge asked me some questions, and then the judge asked my mom if she wanted me anymore, and she said no. She didn't look at me. The judge rambled some stuff, told me I was officially a ward of the state, to be released to my probation officer, my new parents. My new parents told me I had 48 hours to find a place to live, or I'd be placed in a girls' home. Having lived in those places before, I knew I never wanted to go back. I had to continue to go to school, I had to get a job, And I had to have a gallon of milk in my fridge. Yeah, that was a requirement. It's really strange. No lactose intolerance doesn't matter. To be grown up, you have to have milk. There's no boys in my house. I had to submit to random drug testing, and I had to be home by 9 p.m. every night. I'll never forget the smell of the air and the sun on my face as I walked out of the courtroom that day. I was free-ish. I never had to go back to my family, but I had 48 hours to figure out adulting. I didn't have a phone, I didn't have a home, I didn't have a car, just the shoes and the clothes on my body. I didn't have a job, I had nothing. I sat on the corner and collected my thoughts and went through all of my options. I had one friend who was an adult who lived on her own. So I walked to her place. Luckily she was home, she let me stay. And bonus, she told me she was moving out soon and I could have her place, which meant I needed to get a real job. Up until this point, I had my hustle, some under-the-table illegal jobs. My first job was slinging mashed potatoes at Fur's cafeteria. It's a hot spot for elderly people touring Route 66 by megabus. From that point on, just like the 48-hour time limit, I treated each day as a game in which I would try my hardest to level up on something, anything. I set weird goals for myself. I didn't always win the game, but every day I would get up, I'd start over. I played games like figuring out how to make 25 cents more an hour, how to use a cash register, what all the skills were that I needed to become my boss anywhere that I worked. When I found I could no longer play the game where I was, I moved on. I worked elsewhere. I was obsessed with making more money because that was the measure of success in my game. The game's called capitalism, and it actually saved my life. So like a lot of young people who care about other people, I started out as a socialist, and I thought corporations were completely evil. And eventually I realized that corporations and capitalisms were the key to my freedom and ultimate success in this world. I started listening to the lyrics and the punk music that I jammed out to more, and I realized that everything that I actually believed was wrong. I moved to electronic music like you were listening to earlier. I tried to avoid words in my music while I tried to figure out what I believed. I eventually shed every bit of clothing with a brand, anything associated with me with a tribe. I didn't want people to sum me up in one look, and I wanted to keep people guessing. Individualism. There was more to me. I started reading business books. I started my first business, making and selling t-shirts. My life started improving for the first time, and I started dreaming about a future in which I was a business person. It didn't really matter at that point what kind of business. I started to form my own identity. I was a person. I was Cyan. I was capable of things. I had food in my fridge. I still had to put things back at the cash register, but I wasn't hungry all of the time. Individual is something I work on to this day because we aren't defined by labels or groups. We are multifaceted and a combination of a lot of things. I am not a woman. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. We can all be part of a group, but we are always who we are, and we are all capable of independent thought. Mentorship and technology. You know, there were a lot of amazing people on my journey who taught me that I could be more than what I was. They didn't make me successful, but they told me that I could be. When I was homeless, I looked like one of those street kids you see on Upper Haight with the piercings, patches, and a dog, spare changing. I was what we might refer to now as a gutter punk or a crusty kid. I met one of my best friends to this day, walking down the street wearing something that I made. The feeling of seeing somebody wearing something you created is just not describable. You're startup founders, you probably know when you see your logo out there. I stopped this person and we geeked out on making stuff, which led to an invitation to hang out and his phone number. We eventually did hang out, and he had something magical with him, a laptop. Up until this point, computers were something that were not for me. They were unobtainable, they were expensive. I would just break it. I had no use for one, but when I saw him sitting there in the cafe in the dark, I knew I had every use for one. I could feel myself yearning for it, and I asked him, "Can you get online with that? What else can you do?" He showed me all of his art, the stuff he was coding at work, and he took me to a place where we could dial up together. The sound of that modem, and if you've never heard a modem in your life, I recommend that you listen to it, was like the wind on my face stepping out of that courtroom again. And before I knew it, I was on a thing called IRC, Internet Relay Chat, chatting with people all over the world. I was reading about things I was curious about, and I was absolutely hooked. I didn't want to do anything else. I suddenly knew my future, and it had something, anything, to do with that thing and the internet. Chris exposed me to a world I never knew was possible. He brought me to my first DEF CON 23 years ago, which is a hacker conference. He introduced me to hacker culture, and suddenly my brain was fully engaged for the first time in my life. My friends encouraged me to get a tech job. I didn't know how, so they told me if I started at the very bottom, I could work my way up.